expect means, can you expect Lalu Yadav or Tejasvi Yadav, or for that matter any professional politician who is politician by core, to have expertise on environment, to have expertise on cyber security, to have expertise on climate change? No, they cannot be expected, because ultimately they are professional politicians. They do have that mass support, but they do not have the expertise on economy. They cannot have expertise on climate change. So depending on the nature of relationship between executive and legislature, a political system is decided that whether it is presidential system or parliamentary system. In presidential system, you will see that legislature and executive is independent. Hello everyone. So today we are going to discuss chapter 1 of part 2 of Laxmikant, that is parliamentary system, and I am literally happy that now, after disproportionate amount of time that we have spent in part 1, now finally we are entering into part 2 that had taken enough toll on you as well and on me as well, right? So let us discuss this parliamentary system, and if you see on the next slide, this is the layout, this is the verticals in which I have divided this chapter, and under these verticals we will be discussing this chapter. So first we will discuss different form of political system across the globe, like you have this monarchical form, you have this autocracy, you have this presidential form, you have this parliamentary form, although the major focus of this chapter will remain on these two systems, and that too parliamentary system, but we'll discuss other kind of political system as well, right? Thereafter, after having discussed this presidential system and parliamentary system, we'll discuss this, that why India, our constitutional maker, our founding fathers decided to go with this parliamentary system, and thereafter we'll discuss few MCQ, and rather we'll not discuss, I'll expect you to attempt those MCQs and let us know in the comment section. If the correction is required, we'll correct that as well. So after having discussed the approach, let us enter into the first vertical, and that is different form of political system prevailing across the world. So here on this slide, if you can see, I have divided different kind of political system prevailing across the world on the basis of who governs, right? So if a group, if a country, or if a community is being governed by none, the political system that we'll call is that it is a anarchical political system. Then if any person, any community, any group, or any country is being governed by one person, that system will be called, that political system will be called autocracy, and autocracy can be of two types, right? It can be monarchical form of political system or dictatorial, right? Thereafter, if a group, a community, or a country is being governed by few elite people, then that political system will be called oligarchy. Thereafter, if all are governing, all people of that country or all people of the community is active participant in political system, that kind of political system will be called democracy. But even you know that it can't be possible that everybody does participate in policy making, or everybody does participate in execution of every policy. That is not possible, and that's why you have this democracy that has been divided into two kinds, that is direct democracy and representative democracy. So there are only few handful of countries, one or two, mainly Switzerland, which practices this direct democracy, because the tools or the features of direct democracy is very difficult to practice. You have tools like referendum, plebiscite, initiative, recall, and those kind of tools you see cannot be used in every country, right? You have these diverse countries like India, you have diverse countries like United States of America. In India you have 1.4 billion of people, right? And in these kind of countries you cannot practice this direct democracy. I am not elaborating this, that why we cannot practice this direct democracy owing to the tools that it have, because this section we already have covered in chapter 3, that was salient feature of Indian Constitution. So if you want any kind of elaboration on this portion, at least you can go back to that chapter and see that video. So after having discussed the difficulties that we do have in practicing direct democracy, what we have opted is representative democracy, right? So in representative democracy, what we generally tend to do is that people elect few people, few representatives on their behalf, and send those people in assembly, send those people in parliament, and on people's behalf, on our behalf, those elected representative, in our case member of parliament, member of legislative assembly members, they make policy, they execute policy, right? So we do not directly participate in democratic process, right, that we have formed, right? It's our elected representative who on our behalf frame those policies, right? So even in representative democracy, you have two kind of prevailing political system. One is called presidential system and another is parliamentary system, right? So depending on the nature of relationship that executive does have with legislature, I hope you do have an idea by now what is called executive and what is called legislature. So I am not elaborating on that. I assume that you do have an idea. So depending on the nature of relationship between executive and legislature, a political system is decided that whether it is presidential system or parliamentary system. In presidential system, what you say is that legislature and executive is independent of each other. Legislature is elected separately, executive is elected separately, and that's why they enjoy what you call independence, right? That does not happen in parliamentary system. In parliamentary system, what you will see is that executive is drawn from legislature itself, right? In case of ours, we do not elect executive. What we elect is legislature. We elect MLAs, we elect MPs, right? And among those MP, the people who get to form government, right, their party decides that who will be part of executive, right? So what we have is, in conclusion, that executive is nothing. Executive is drawn from legislature as itself, right, in parliamentary form of government. So I hope you do have now idea or difference between what is presidential form of government and what is parliamentary form of government. In parliamentary system, executive is part of legislature and stays in power as long as it commands the confidence in the house it belongs. So our legislature or our executive belongs to lower house, right? Coming to parliament, division of parliamentary system. So parliamentary form of government, if you can see on the screen, it again has been divided into two parts. One is constitutional monarchy and another is republic, right? So in parliamentary form of government, you will see there are two terms. One is called head of state and another is called head of government. The difference we'll see in the next slide. As of now, just take in constitutional monarchy, head of state is a hereditary position. Head of state is not elected, right? So in England, in Canada, in New Zealand, in Japan, in Australia, so in these countries that we just cited, right, you have queens or kings who are having hereditary position, and those people are head of, assuming the post of designation of head of state. While that is not the case in republic. In republic, you have head of state who are elected, right? So in case of India, if you see, president is called head of state and president is a elected office, right? So in republic, head of state would be elected, while in case of constitutional monarchy, that is in case of England and Japan like countries, king or queens assume that office and that is a hereditary office, right? So I hope these kind of political system you will have an idea on, right? Let us move to the next slide and let us see what are the different kind of political system that is prevailing across the world on the world map, right? So here on in this blue, if you see on the screen, almost all of the South American countries along with this North America, right, is practicing this presidential form of government. Then Central African country along with this Central Asian countries, right, all these countries are having this presidential form of government. Then in parliamentary form of government, you have two division. One is Indian kind of parliamentary system, right, where head of state is elected, and then this constitutional monarchy. So if you see, constitutional monarchy is being practiced here in New Zealand, Australia, Japan, right? Then you have Canada, then you have England and Spain, right? So all these countries are practicing what you call constitutional monarchy, right? So now you have a pictorial idea. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss this presidential form of government first, and thereafter we'll discuss parliamentary. So first vertical is over. Now we are entering into second vertical, that is presidential form of government, thereafter parliamentary, and thereafter the difference between two. And then why we decided to go with parliamentary system. So this is how we had planned, right? So let us discuss this presidential form of government, right? So presidential form of government works on one philosophy, and that philosophy is called doctrine of separation of power. So this doctrine of separation of power is nothing but it suggests that different organs of the state, that is legislature, executive and judiciary, should be independent of each other, right? So just now we'll take example of United States of America's presidential model, and we'll see that how their legislature, executive and judiciary is independent of each other. As of now, just consider that in presidential form of government, what they follow is doctrine of separation of power, where it is expected that all three organs of the state is independent of each other. No organ oversteps its limit, right, or get into territory of others. So from legislature, it is expected that they'll frame the laws, they'll make policy, while from executive, that is president in presidential form, right, he will implement, he'll execute the policy that has been designed, that has been framed from legislature, and the judiciary will check the constitutional validity of the laws that has been enacted by legislature and signed by executive. And if there is any violation of constitutional philosophy on any point, judiciary holds power to invalidate that law, right? So that is these are the function that has been divided to different organs of the state, and it is always expected that they will work independently, they will never step into others' territory, right? So that is the philosophy they work on, right? Thereafter, let us move to the next slide and let us take example of United States of America to discuss this presidential system. So United States of America has a bicameral legislature where the lower house is called House of Representative and upper house is called the Senate, right? So if you can see the lower house, that has 435 members and it is a elected body. Surprisingly, it has only 2 years of term, right? In our case, the lower house has term of 5 years. So they have only this 2 years of term, and the seat allocation to every state, they do have 50 states, and seat allocation to every state is on the basis of population, right? That was the logic that we follow, right? Then go to the upper house, that is Senate, right? So Senate has 100 members and they are also elected body, right? So in our case, Rajya Sabha, we do elect, but we do elect indirectly, right? In Rajya Sabha's members election, people directly do not participate, right? They are elected by member of legislative assembly members. Their term is 6 years, and here again there is something different from our upper house, and the difference is that the 2 seat is allocated to almost every state, right? So they do have 50 states, 2 seats to 1 state, that translate into 100 seats, right? So they do have equality of representation in upper house for every state, and that is one reform that is perhaps being suggested in Indian Rajya Sabha as well. So in our Rajya Sabha system, in our upper house, what we do have is that states like UP or Maharashtra does have good amount of representation, while the smaller states like Manipur and Goa does have 1 or 2 seats, right? So that is one reform that has been suggested by various committees, and that has been pending, right? Thereafter, president who is elected, so these 2 bodies, that is Senate and House of Representative, is collectively called Congress, right? In our case, our 2 house collectively along with president is called Parliament, right? But in their case, it is called Congress. So now onwards, whenever I'll refer to Congress, you have to consider these 2 bodies collectively, right? So this is the legislative body. Thereafter, now we are moving to the executive body, right? So president who is elected separately, right? And he is called head of state as well and head of government as well. So there is no such distinction that is in our case, that when we'll study this parliamentary system, you will see a distinction between head of state and head of government. But here, same person, that is president who is elected separately, right? He does not belong. In our case, our executive, that is prime minister and council of minister, right? They belong to these 2 houses, any of these 2 houses, but that is not the case here, right? The president who is executive does not belong to these 2 houses and his election happens separately, right? And that's why he is independent of this legislative body. Independence of different organs of state we had talked about in the previous slide, right? That was one necessary condition in doctrine of separation of power, and that independence has been ensured from here. And how? Because he is elected separately, and that's why his continued working in office is not dependent on these people, except for the impeachment process, right? These people does not have much control on his functioning, right? And that's why he is independent. So enough on that independence part. Once he has been elected, he is free to choose his cabinet, and his cabinet can be outside of the Congress, right? Again, the differentiation. Our Prime Minister has to choose his cabinet amongst the Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha's member, right? Although again there can be exceptions, right? Dr. Jaishankar has been, who was not a member of Parliament, right? He was inducted into cabinet minister, and later he was given that Rajya Sabha entry, right? So here in this case, president is free to choose his cabinet outside, and mostly president, be it Barack Obama, George Bush, or current Trump, right? They choose their cabinet outside from the Congress as well, to have what you call independence, have some kind of independence. Both the head of state, this aspect we already have covered, right? Let us move to the next thing. So these two houses are collectively called Congress and designs the law. Now we are discussing in the functions, right? So we already had discussed that these two houses are collectively called Congress, and these houses designs the law and sends it to president, right? Then president has to sign this bill in 10 days, and if he does not sign that bill in 10 days, right, that bill will be deemed to be passed unless he exercises his veto. So what are the vetoes that are available? Although that is not the scope of this chapter, but there are different kind of vetoes. The two vetoes that I'll mention here, one is pocket veto, right? So if Congress is not in session, right, means this two houses are not in session, he does have power to exercise the pocket veto, right? He can also do one thing, he can resend this bill to the Congress if the Congress is in session, right? But for the reconsideration. Now the thing is that Congress does have an option to override this veto that he has sent, this bill that he has sent. This bill can be overridden, his veto can be overridden if Congress decided to pass the law in the same format by 2/3 of the majority this time. So if he has resent for the reconsideration, and if Congress does not want to make any kind of changes, the Congress simply needs to pass the same bill in the same format with 2/3 of the majority, and in that case his veto will be overridden, right? So this is what about vetoes. Thereafter, on top of these two body, what is you have a judiciary. So legislative, executive, and judiciary, these are the three organs. So legislative and executive we had discussed. Let us move into judiciary, right? So judiciary is the most powerful organ of United States of America, right? What we do have in our case, Indian system, is that we do have a kind of balance between judiciary and legislature, but there the judiciary is so powerful that it is called third chamber of legislature, owing to the judicial review power that they do hold, right? Mind you, the judicial review feature has been borrowed from United States itself, because the powerfulness of the judicial review feature that US has. So coming back to this topic, judiciary, which is most powerful organ of the state, adjudicates the law which is violating the constitution. Owing to its wide power, it is also described as third chamber of the legislature. So I hope you do have an idea on composition of these three bodies and functions of these two bodies, right? So here what we saw is that these three bodies, right, legislature, executive, and judiciary, is completely independent of each other, and they are working in silos, right? So if these three organs of the state is working in the silos, there may be chances that it may lead to conflict, and it may lead to economic or social chaos, right? So how do they avoid this kind of conflict, chances of conflict or lack of coordination, right? Because what you saw is right now, right, they are completely independent, and that may again lead to some kind of lack of coordination. So how do they manage, how do this constitution, United States constitution or presidential system has been functioning from last 240 years, when they do not have any kind of coordination or checks and balances, right? So let us move to the next slide and let us see that how this seemingly three organs that is seemingly functioning in silos without any amount of coordination, how do they are functioning from last 240 years. So what is that is keeping them together, right? So let us see that how they do checks and balances each other, right? So that no organ of the state has exceedingly large powers, right? So here you see that Congress enacts the laws and sends it president, right? President, who is executive, he is supposed to sign the bill, but what president can do is president can exercise his veto, right? That veto option has been given, and can send this bill for the reconsideration to Congress, right? So if Congress does not design a good law which is favoring or which is improving lives of the people, president does have option of exercising pocket veto, and that bill will end there itself, or he can resend this bill, and if that bill is not passed by 2/3 of the majority, again that bill will end, right? So this is the way how president is exercising, or president is checking the powers of Congress. Let us move to the next step, and next step is that Congress now president has attempted to check the power of Congress. Now what is the way that Congress can check the power of president? So Congress can override this veto by 2/3 majority. So if Congress manages this 2/3 majority, right, his veto will not function, right? That veto can be discarded. So this is how Congress had checked the veto powers of the president. Let us move to the next step and let us see judiciary now. Judiciary, which is seeming on top of these two things, that is legislature and executive. Judiciary has to validate. Now judiciary, through judicial review powers, right, they do have power to validate or invalidate, right, these laws passed by this judiciary and signed by executive, right, depending on the constitutional validity. So suddenly judiciary will start sounding like a very powerful organization, because it does hold power to invalidate laws that has been passed by legislature and signed by executive. But that is not the case. What you will notice, if you have seen that salient lectures chapter where we had done the comparison between Indian judiciary election and US judiciary election, you would have noticed, right, the method of election of United States of America's judiciary, right? So in America, president gets to nominate the members of higher judiciary, and his nominated member is confirmed by Congress, right? And if Congress approves those members will get into Supreme Court, right? So if you have noticed, if president has nominated some member to the Supreme Court, right, of course that judge will tend to favor the bills that has been signed by president, right? So judiciary is also not that strong body, which was till now sounding like a very powerful organization, right? So if judiciary is not that strong, or if judiciary has been appointed by a president which belongs to a party, and there is chances that the president may not act in a bipartisan manner, so a person who has been nominated by the same president, right, who may have some political agenda, how can judge nominated by that president may maintain impartiality, right? US constitution makers again can't be so fool that they'll allow this thing to happen, right? So how this judicial impartiality is maintained when the president, a partisan president, has been given option to nominate Supreme Court's judiciary, right? So that impartiality is ensured by this provision, and the provision is that judges in United States of America is appointed for life. So once the judges are selected by this Congress and nominated by president, they do have that independence, they do have that power to carve out an independent space for themselves, because mind you, the impeachment process again for judges, if they are not acting in the way that the president would like them to act, right, the only thing president or the president's party can do is to start an impeachment process. And if impeachment process is started against any judge, the opposition will make sure that the judge is not impeached, right? So this provision of being appointed for life is one provision that ensures judicial impartiality, right? So I hope different checks and balances method in the presidential system of United States of America is now at least clear to you, that okay, on the one side there was something called independence of different organs of the state, but now what you have is this checks and balances, right? And perhaps this method of checks and balances ensure that no organ of the state exceeds its limit. Every organ of the state remains in its jurisdiction, right? So in addition to all these things, there is one more provision that ensures what you call checks and balances between legislature and executive, right? So if you know, president who is considered as executive in United States of America, he is elected for 4 years. So once a president has been elected, right, and if you remember from the previous slide, the term of lower house was 2 years, right? So once a president has been elected for 4 years, he will have to go in the election, a midterm election that they call, right? So he will have to get into midterm election immediately after his election or after 2 years of his election to ask for his party to be voted in the lower house, right? And if president is incompetent, if president has been during those 2 years, first 2 years of his office, if he has been considered inefficient, or if he is not coordinating properly with the legislature, which is leading to some kind of chaotic situation in the society, right, his party members will not be voted into the lower house, and the result will that he'll lose control in the lower as well as upper house. Because remember, even in upper house, 1/3 of the member retires every second year, right? So if the president loses through this midterm election, if the president loses control over these two houses, the result will be that he cannot have his economic agenda, he cannot have his political agendas passed through various policies from this legislature. And so the result is that over broader economic policies or over a broader decision, there is always consensus between legislature and executive, right? So this is again a controlling feature, right? Any president cannot take extreme position which is not acceptable in that country, right? So remember these gun laws and other things. So whenever there is some kind of broader decision, right, you will always find that there is consensus between president and legislature. So that feature as well, this timing of the election, right, has been designed in such a way that president, whether he likes it or not, he has to give some amount of consensus irrespective of the party's agenda, irrespective of the party he belongs to. So if Trump belongs to Republican Party, and if a good policy has been brought out by Democratic Party in the lower house, right, and society is accepting that policy, right, Trump will have to approve that policy. Because if he does not approve that policy just for the political reason, right, remember when he'll get into this midterm election, right, his party may not get vote, he cannot get his members into the lower and upper house. So that again acts as a balancing feature or a feature of checks and balances. So enough on this presidential system. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss parliamentary system, features of parliamentary system, thereafter merits and demerits of parliamentary system, and with MCQs our chapter will be over, right? So let us move to the next slide and let us discuss how this genesis of parliamentary system in India's constitution has happened over a period of time and how has been its growth, right? So as the heading suggests, genesis and growth of parliamentary system in modern form. Although if you are a revivalist, you might claim that you had this in Buddha's time, you had these two clans, that is Lichmi or Vaji, right, during Buddha's time, who were functioning as a republic, right? But then there are some differentiation, like those legislative, executive and judicial functions all were vested in one body, and that's why those bodies cannot be called truly basis for this parliamentary system, and that's why I have not considered. As far as this modern parliamentary system in modern form is concerned, right, I will trace its genesis from Charter Act 1853. So if you have read the first chapter or this Charter Act 1853 for the first time, it was through this Charter Act that legislative and executive bodies were separated. Till now, until this 1853, executive body of Governor General was taking all the decision. It was performing legislative and executive functions both, but in 1853 you had this addition of 6 additional members as legislative councillors members, and this led to genesis of what you call parliamentary system in modern form, right? Thereafter you had various Indian Councils Act in 1861, 1892, 1909, and then Government of India Act in 1919 and 1935, which further strengthened the provision of parliamentary system, right? So I am not discussing various provisions of these acts, because this act I am expecting that you already would have read and would have an idea on. So this observation I am leaving on you, that which provision of these act has strengthened or has developed parliamentary system, right? So if you remember, the provincial government or central government that was formed in 1924 or in 1946 election or 1937 election, so in all those elections or whatever provincial government or central government that were formed, right, those governments functioned on parliamentary system itself, and that was the one major reason why our constitutional makers decided to go with parliamentary system and not presidential system. But then that is a matter of another vertical that we'll discuss, that why we decided to go with parliamentary system. As of now, just as far as growth of parliamentary system in modern form is considered, right, genesis you can trace from this Charter Act, and growth has been because of these acts, right? Thereafter, parliamentary system in India has been at both the central and provincial state levels as well. So in Article 74 and 75 at the center, and in Article 163 and 164 in the state, parliamentary form of government has been dealt with. So parliamentary form of government is also called Westminster's form of government, right? And it is also referred as cabinet form of government by some political scientists like Ivor Jennings, right? Along with cabinet form of government, at times in independent India's post-independent India's history, this cabinet form of government has also been called prime ministerial form of government. So whenever prime minister's office vis-a-vis cabinet has been strengthened, right, so those time limits or those time frame in post-independent history, right, has been referred as prime ministerial type of government, right? So during Indira Gandhi's time, or whenever any prime minister has been politically so powerful that only her or his name has gained votes, right? Even during recent time where you have a strong political leader at the center, so his form of government can also be called, right, prime ministerial type of government. Public administration students can understand it in a much better manner, right? So after having discussed these things, let us move to the next slide and let us discuss what is, although we already have discussed what is your parliamentary form of government or what is parliamentary system when we were discussing the differentiation between presidential and parliamentary form of government, right? But for sake of definition, let us take that what is the parliamentary system of government. So whenever you have executive that is dependent on legislature, or executive which is drawn from legislature itself, right, that form of political system will be called parliamentary form of political system. Let us discuss certain features, certain important features of parliamentary system, and these are the features, these are the verticals under which we will discuss parliamentary system or parliamentary political system, right? So here you see you have this nominal and real executive. We'll explain this, right? Right now we are just discussing in it broadly, right? Majority party role, then collective responsibility, political hegemony, then double membership, thereafter dissolution of Lok Sabha, then secrecy, and then leadership of prime minister. So under these features we'll study parliamentary system. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss this concept of nominal and real executive. So what is this nominal and real executive? Remember when we were discussing this presidential system, this distinction, I had told you that this distinction was absent in presidential form of government, because the same person that was president, he was head of state as well and head of government as well. But this distinction lies here in parliamentary system of government, because you have in India or any kind of parliamentary system, you have these two concepts, that is head of state and head of government. Those are different bodies or different offices. So in Indian system, in Indian political system, you have president who is head of state, while prime minister who is chief executive, right, he is head of government, right. Also there are two other terms, de facto and de jure, right. So prime minister is called de facto head, while president is called de jure head, right. Most of the decision, executive decision, although are taken practically by prime minister, and that's why he is called de facto head, but those decision or transaction of business of government happens in the name of president, and that's why he is also called de jure head, or he is nominal head or ceremonial head, because practically it's not the president but it's prime minister who is chief executive, right. So you have nominal and real executive, de facto, de jure, right. So these are the differentiation. Prime minister is de facto head, while president is de jure head. Similarly in states, right, you have position of governor and CM. So in states, CM is called de facto head, while governor is de jure head, right. PM is head of government, while president is head of state, right. And these things, these information we are studying under this heading of nominal and real executive. Then this distinction is missing in presidential system. We already have discussed this. Then Article 74 is what that defines relationship, what kind of relationship that nominal and real executive will have, that is president and prime minister, right. So let us move to the next slide and let us discuss this relationship between this prime minister and real executive that has been defined by Article 74. So now in the next slide we are going to discuss Article 74. So as you can see on the screen, right, Article 74 has two clauses, right. The first clause is little lengthy. We will break up this first clause in two parts, and so actually we will not break up, right. For the prelims it has to be broken, right, because it is very important. So let us read this first clause and thereafter we'll see. So there shall be a council of minister with prime minister as its head to aid and advise the president. So let us stop here and let us discuss the meaning. So there shall be a council of minister whose head is prime minister to aid and advise the president, right. So there actually implicit word here is always. So there shall always be a council of ministers. So you would often see that on expiration of term, when CM goes to resign to the governor, or when prime minister goes to the resign to the president, right, generally what you would have seen in the news is that governor often asks CM to continue as caretaker chief minister or caretaker prime minister by president, right. You would have seen, right, in Kejriwal's case recently, when he resigned, right, he was asked by lieutenant governor to continue as caretaker government, right. So this happens after expiration of term. As soon the term of that assembly or Lok Sabha expires, this is a norm, this is a custom that prime minister or chief minister in case of state, they go to governor or president, right, and they are suggested by president and governor to continue their office, because here you see that at the head to aid and advise the president. So there shall always be council of minister who will aid and advise the president. So this office of council of minister, be it as center or be it in states, right, should never be vacated, because then there will be no one to aid and advise this president, right. So that was the first part. Thereafter, who shall in exercise of his function act in accordance with such advice, right. So president has to act in accordance with the advice that has been extended by council of minister, right. So he shall, right. So in all the conditions, this president has to act according to aid and advice. So if you ask me in binaries, I'll say yes, he has to, because this has been mandated by 42nd Amendment by Indira Gandhi. But one relaxation that was given by Janata government through 44th Amendment, you will see that they gave a relaxation to the president, that the president can send, if he does not like any of the idea or any of the aid and advice that Council of Minister has extended to him or her, right, the president can send that advice to the cabinet for reconsideration, and after reconsideration, irrespective of whether there has been change into the decision of Council of Minister or not, right, president has to act now, right, irrespective of whether Council of Minister has changed their advice or not, right. So only once the president can resend it for reconsideration. After that, it is incumbent entirely on Council of Minister whether those people change their advice or not, right. Thereafter it will be binding, right. So that relaxation has been given, extended or amended by 44th Amendment by Janata government. So here, if you can see on the screen, right, 42nd Amendment, in 42nd Amendment, Madam Gandhi, right, she amended Article 74 and she inserted that word called shall, that the president shall act in accordance with the advice of Council of Minister, right. So that provision again by 44th Amendment that we just discussed was amended in 1978 by Janata government, and Janata government extended this relaxation to the president, that once he can send it for reconsideration, right. So either generally or otherwise, and the president shall act in accordance with the advice tendered after such reconsideration, right. So I hope you would have understood, and that's why I was saying that the first clause needs to be broken in two parts. So first part was that there shall always be Council of Minister, right, whether in permanent form or in caretaker form, and the second format is that president now after this 44th Amendment does have this power to send the consideration or send the advice of cabinet for the reconsideration at least once. Once Council of Minister has again sent it back to president, irrespective of change or not change, president has to act according to the advice that is binding. Now the second clause, the question whether any and if so what advice was tendered by minister to the president shall not be inquired into any court. So what does this mean? So whatever suggestion or whatever advice that ministers extend to president in any matter, that shall never be inquired into the court, right. So that is the constitutional position, and that is Article 74. So I hope Article 74 would be clear, and the first feature of what you call this parliamentary system would be clear. Let us move to discuss second feature, and that is majority party rule. So I need not to explain, this is plain simple, right. So whichever party secures majority into general election or assembly election, they are invited by president or governor to form the government, right. So at times you will see that if any single party has not secured majority, there may be chances that pre-poll alliance or post-poll alliance, if a post-poll alliance has managed to secure that majority number, their leader would be invited by president and governor. So majority party rule, that is the feature. Then collective responsibility, this is one of the important and feature of parliamentary system of government, and that's why this has been called bedrock of parliamentary system, right. What is this collective responsibility? So collective responsibility means that members of Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha, that is lower house, although they are responsible to parliament as a whole, but in general they are responsible to the Lok Sabha, because it is the Lok Sabha, right, which elects these people directly, right. So that's why they swim and sink together, right. So if Council of Ministers are continuing in the office, they'll continue to do so collectively, but there is nothing called that no confidence motion can be passed against one individual minister. So if there has been a no confidence motion passed against Council of Minister, it's not against one particular minister, all Council of Minister needs to resign, and that's why this high sounding word, that is they swim and sink together, right. Then collective responsibility has been discussed in Article 75. So let us discuss Article 75 as well, right, because that is also important from your prelim point of view. That will get you solve many of the MCQs from this chapter. So there are 5 clauses on the screen that you can see, and the first clause, if you read on the screen, the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President, plain simple, and the other ministers shall be appointed by the President on the advice of Prime Minister. So it is prerogative of Prime Minister that he will give this list to President, that who he want as cabinet minister in his team, right? So political decision aside, right, if you have a coalition government, right, so the members of cabinet is generally decided by some coordination between these political parties, right, but it is ultimately prerogative of Prime Minister. Again, I am saying that caution, that political decision or political considerations aside, it is the prerogative of Prime Minister that who he wants to be as cabinet minister in his team are. Right. There are second clause, ministers shall hold office during the pleasure of President, but this thing is only followed in letter, not in spirit, because the next subsequent clause, if you read, the Council of Ministers shall be collectively responsible to the House of People, that is the lower house, so they should be collectively responsible. So this clause, why I told that this clause is followed only in letter, not in spirit, because this pleasure of President, right, does not really count. As long as Council of Ministers does enjoy confidence of this House of People, this pleasure of President principle does not work, right, because this case has been dragged in Supreme Court. This clause actually has been dragged into Supreme Court, that what is the meaning of this pleasure of President, means can President dissolve Council of Minister or a government at his will, right, even if they enjoy confidence of this House of People? The answer Supreme Court observed was no. So as long as Supreme Court observed that as long as these people, Council of Ministers, enjoy the confidence of House of People, right, there is nothing called pleasure of President. So this is only in letter, not in spirit. Thereafter, before a minister enters in upon his office, President shall administer oath. What kind of oath? So there are 2 oaths that Council of Ministers are administered, and that is oath of office, that is allegiance to Constitution, and then oath of secrecy, that they will not declare any information, any policy matters of cabinet meetings to anyone, right? So that is oath of secrecy, and all these oaths has been mentioned where? In 3rd schedule, according to the form set out for the purpose in the 3rd schedule. What is the 2nd schedule? Emoluments. 1st schedule, states, state boundaries, state name. 4th schedule, allocation of seats in Rajya Sabha. So this is how, whenever there is one schedule, right, this is how you relate the topics, right? So whenever this term 3rd schedule came, just make your mind कि हाँ 1st schedule में क्या था, 2nd schedule में क्या था, उसी टाइम आप revise कर लो, right? So that should be the approach while dealing with any subject, not only polity, right? Returning back to this topic, 5th clause, a minister who for any period of 6 consecutive months is not a member of, let me tell you the essence, you can read it, let me get away from the screen, you can read it. So having assumed that you already have read it, right, let me tell you the essence. So a member, there is a provision in our parliamentary system that a person can be inducted into cabinet, right, without being member of both the houses, right, or either of the houses, right? So Dr. Jaishankar, who was not member of either Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha, he was inducted into cabinet, and later he was brought to the upper house through the election, right? So one person like me, if of course means I would be lucky, and if Prime Minister decides to induct me into his cabinet, he can do well so, provided that if he ensures that I get to elected into Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha within 6 months. So if a person, if Jaishankar would not, Dr. Jaishankar would not have been elected either of these houses, right, then he had to resign. He could not continue as cabinet minister or council or part of Council of Ministers. So I hope Article 75 would also be clear. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss the next feature of the parliamentary system. So next feature is political homogeneity. So almost every member of the Council of Ministers, right, they almost belong to what you call the same political party, and that's why political homogeneity. So even in coalition government, you would have seen that at cabinet level, at policy level, there would be broad agreement and there at least you will see, yes, in different states they can have their statements can have some kind of misalignment, but as far as cabinet decision, policy decisions are concerned, you will see political homogeneity even if there is coalition government. If there is one party government, like in case right now, right, BJP does enjoy a whole majority, absolute majority, then of course you will see political homogeneity. But even in case of coalition at cabinet level, at least you will see what you call political homogeneity. Then double membership. What is this double membership? So this is very important feature of this parliamentary system, right? Because this is very principle of what you call parliamentary system. So ministers or council of ministers, so those are members of executive as well and members of legislature as well. So we do not get to choose our what you call executive. What we choose is legislature, and ultimately this group of legislature who gets majority and they gets to decide that who will be executive, right? So that's why double membership, that the ministers are member of executive as well as legislature as well. And here when you have this double membership, dual membership, what you see is that this absence of separation of power, right? Why this absence of separation of power? The separation of power is a presidential political system concept, right? In a parliamentary system, you will find this absence. Why? Because legislature and executive is almost same. So the person who is executive, he is also member of legislature as well, and that you will see leads to conflict of interest. There is nothing that everything is negative. There are some positives as well of this double membership, and the positive is that this double membership leads to interdependence. How this leads to interdependence? Because executive or council of ministers can function as long as they enjoy a majority in the house, right? And to secure or to be able to secure this majority, what council of ministers has to do is that they have to be cooperative mindset, right? So if when you would have seen that if government has to take a decision at country level, or the decision or the policies which has wide implication, you would have noticed that they get to have all party meetings just to have their consensus as well. Just a day ago, corona is going on, right? So a day ago only our prime minister dialed Sonia Gandhi ji, our prime minister dialed erstwhile presidents, erstwhile prime minister, right? So that there could be broader consensus on this fight with corona, right? So what they are seeking ultimately is this cooperation, right? Cooperation not from Sonia Gandhi, of course, means don't, or from erstwhile, means ultimately from their party members in what you call Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So this double membership is nothing. This double membership, the positive side, if you see, this leads to interdependence and consequent cooperation. So I hope you do have clarity on this feature as well. Let us move to the next slide. Then dissolution of lower house. So PM, Prime Minister or Chief Minister in parliamentary system does have power that they can recommend President or Governor to dissolve the lower house either on expiration of the term or whenever they like. Whenever they like, so can they recommend, PM or CM recommend the dissolution of house in any condition? The answer is no, right? So recently you had this Kamal Nath Congress-led government in Madhya Pradesh, right? So Supreme Court had advised him to undergo that no confidence motion on a particular day at 5 p.m. So he resigned just 2 hours ago of assuming that no confidence motion. So he does have that option that he could have recommended the dissolution of house to the governor, right? But if he would have recommended, if he would have chosen that path of recommending governor to dissolve the house, was that advice binding on the governor? No. So yes, Prime Minister or Chief Minister does have power to recommend President and Governor to dissolve the house, but only as long as you have that confidence of the house. So if you enjoy majority in Lok Sabha or Assembly, right? Not in the case where you have to get into no confidence motion, or if you have to secure majority and before that, just because you fear that you won't be able to secure majority, you won't be able to command the confidence. So in those cases, if you recommend to the President or Governor for dissolution of house, in such cases this recommendation would not be binding on President or Governor. So dissolution of house would would also be clear that every 5 years at least, even before 5 years as well, if you had in 2004 Atal Bihari Vajpayee, because he felt politically expedient. So just few months ago, before completion of 5 years, he had recommended the dissolution of house to the president, right? And president dissolved the house because at that moment he was commanding the majority. It was just that he was politically motivated. He felt that at this moment, when our schemes are performing fine, right, it would be politically expedient for him, right? So in those situations, yes, this house can be dissolved. Then secrecy. So president administers oath of secrecy and oath of office as well, right, to the ministers. So here we are discussing only about secrecy. So president administers oath of secrecy to Union Council of Ministers and governor to the state minister, right? In schedule 3 it has been mentioned, right, oath of secrecy, right, along with oath of office as well, right? So this is the third schedule. Here you do have oath of office. This is the format of oath of office for the union minister, and this is oath of secrecy for the union minister, right? So under article 75(4) you have these things, and article 164(3), right, for state, it will have this oath of office and oath of secrecy, right? So that is the thing. I hope features of parliamentary system would be clear to you. Let us move to the next slide and let us discuss the merits of parliamentary system in India, right? So along with the merits, what we'll do is that we'll keep discussing demerits of presidential system as well, because whatever merit that we do have is of parliamentary system, those same merits will become demerit for presidential system, right? So that we do not need to have a separate slide comparing different kind of political system, right? So you have first merit is that harmony between legislature and executive. So how this harmony between legislature and executive is achieved in parliamentary system? Because executive is nothing, executive is member of legislature itself, right? And council of minister, how do in Indian system council of ministers are formed? As long as one party is in majority, right, that majority party get right to have their council of ministers, right? So if the executive is amongst this legislature, so they will always have this harmonious relationship with the legislature. So that is the first merit of parliamentary system. The second merit is responsible government, right? So there was a debate between responsible and stable government when constitutional makers or founding fathers were asked that what are the two major things that you want to achieve from this parliamentary system. Their response was that a responsible government and a stable government. Although these two objectives cannot be achieved by one particular political system, because in presidential system, if you see, they do have stability but they don't have this responsibility, because they do have separation of power, right? And nobody is accountable to, no organ is accountable to any other organ, right? So that's why my comment that no government or no political system, be it presidential system or parliamentary system, can fulfill both the objective that our founding fathers envisioned, that was responsible government and stable government, right? So if you have responsible government, that is the case in parliamentary system, you will not have stability. We'll see why we will not have stability, because if you see, right, every government that is elected for around 5 years, there is no guarantee they'll sustain for 5 years. What happened again in Madhya Pradesh, what happened in Karnataka, right? So there is no guarantee. So there is no stability in parliamentary system, that we'll discuss as part of demerit. But what we do have is responsible government, right? So member council of minister has to be responsible to the legislative assembly or the lower house, that is Lok Sabha in case of center and in case of state, right? So a responsible government is ensured by article 75, and there is some tools as well that has been mentioned in parliament, right? And through those tools our constitution ensure that council of ministers remain responsible, and those tools are question hours, no confidence motion, then various standing committees where questions are asked from these people, these council of minister, and adjournment motion. So these are the tools through which responsibility of government is fixed, right? So this is again a merit of parliamentary system, right? That the debate between responsible government and stable government, right, we'll discuss later as well while discussing demerit part. So what are the features, what are the merits of parliamentary system that we have discussed so far? The first was that there is a harmony between legislature and executive that was absent in presidential system. So the critique of presidential system is this, right? This is a merit of parliamentary system, but this is a demerit of what you call presidential system. In presidential system, you will see that there is always contentious relationship between legislature and executive, right? President Trump and Congress keeps fighting with each other, right? Because of this absence of harmony. You have this responsible government as merit, but their responsibility is missing, right? Thereafter, the tools of responsible government we have read. Let us move to the next slide. It prevents despotism. What is this despotism, right? So there can't be one man army. That is again a case in presidential system, right? So here what you have is cabinet form of government, where what you call from every community, right? You have leaders. You do have leaders from cabinet members from Muslim community. You have leaders from tribal community, right? So there can't be despotism because cabinet form of government you do have, and then there are again the tools that ensures that these people remains responsible, and as long as council of minister is responsible, there can't be despotism. Thereafter, the next merit of parliamentary system is that there is always ready alternative government. That is again not the case in presidential system, right? So how do we do have ready alternative government, right? So you would have seen cases again in this Madhya Pradesh, right? So it was not the case that immediately after fall of this Kamal Nath government, right, they had to go, Madhya Pradesh had to undergo election, right? You had this ready alternative government. So Shivraj Singh could secure the majority, and he took the oath, right? Similar case in Karnataka. Next is wide representation. So what is this wide representation? Wide representation essentially means that cabinet is full from every community, right? So while forming the cabinet, prime minister and chief minister, even maybe for political reasons, but they do take care that they have representatives from every community, from every caste. So that is the meaning, that is the merit of wide representation, right? Thereafter, move to the next slide and let us discuss few demerits of parliamentary system. So demerits: unstable government, right? There is no guarantee that once elected that government will always survive for 5-year term, right? Then there is no continuity in policies, right? Let us discuss these things in detail, right? So unstable government, so it may be because of defection or withdrawal of, or if there is coalition government, there may be case that the coalition partner is not happy and they may withdraw support from coalition partner, and that may lead to fall in government. So recently you had again the case of MP and Karnataka, right? But in presidential system, right, so this unstable government, that is a demerit of parliamentary system, right, it will become a merit of what you call presidential system. So in presidential system what you do have is stability, right? They do not have answerability, but they do have stability because council of minister, right, that is executive in our case, in their case executive is president, right? So president once elected to the office, he will continue to be in office for 4 years unless he is impeached, but that impeachment process is very difficult. So they do have, what they do have is stability. Executive not dependent on legislature for survival. So that is in our case. Here council of minister has to depend on majority in lower house, right? Then no continuity of policies, that is again a demerit of parliamentary system. So you would have seen often the cases when in 2014 NDA government assumed charge, there were hundreds of schemes whose name was changed, right, only for the political reasons, without realizing that there are costs involved. Even if you say that the objectives of the scheme are same, but administrative costs that just a name change incurs, you cannot imagine, right? So this picture has been picked up from Congress website, where they have claimed that whatever scheme that Modi government came with or NDA government came with in 2014, against those schemes they already had a scheme running with the same objective but with a different name. So Pahal you had this direct benefit transfer to LAG, LPG, sorry, Swachh Bharat Mission, Nirmal Bharat Mission, Deen Dayal Upadhyay Antyodaya Yojana, the National Urban Livelihood Mission, and the list goes on. So they have counted these name of the scheme with the similar objective that NDA government came with, right? So that was why this no continuity in policies, right? So you cannot have long-term policies, right? Because every 5 years you have government changes, and every government have different agenda, different political agendas, right? That was the one demerit of parliamentary system, right? So another example could be the 42nd Amendment and 44th Amendment. So 42nd Amendment, mind you, was known as mini constitution, right? But in 42nd Amendment, whatever amendment Madam Gandhi did, all those amendment, most of, if not all, most of those amendment were turned down in 44th Amendment, right? Because of political reason. That's why this heading, that no continuity of policy as part of demerit of parliamentary system. But that is not the case in presidential system. In presidential system, even the day president leaves the office, you already have a Congress whose term is still left. So Congress can ensure the continuity of policies, right? Thereafter, this dictatorship of cabinet. So just because Council of Minister is part of government, they know that their party enjoy majority in lower house, right? So whatever decision they want to take, recently that lockdown decision, right, immediately taken, although that can be called as a good decision, but such big decisions should never be taken in haste without including people from other political parties, right? They should have gone for a consensus, if not consensus, at least they would have discussed this with other party as well. The decision of demonetization was another example of what you call executive tyranny. So that's why this is called dictatorship of cabinet, because cabinet already know that they do enjoy a majority, right? So as long as their party is in majority, of course, if it is a coalition government, right, then there may be some compulsion, but if there is a single party majority, what you will see is executive tyranny, right? So that is again a demerit of parliamentary system. The other demerit is that against separation of power, because executive is part of legislature, right? That again leads to conflict of interest. So that's why this against separation of power, right? Presidential system, while it is very basic principle, is separation of power, legislative or executive, and judiciary is completely separated from each other, right? Then government by amateur. So most of time you will see that professional politician enters into these houses, right? So what can you expect? Means, can you expect Lalu Yadav or Tejasvi Yadav, or for that matter any professional politician who is politician by core, to have expertise on environment, to have expertise on cyber security, to have expertise on climate change? No, they cannot be expected, because ultimately they are professional politicians. They do have that mass support, but they do not have the expertise on economy. They cannot have expertise on climate change. That's why this government by amateur. But then that inadequateness is fulfilled always by the secretaries that they are given, or the standing committees that parliament forms, where in those standing committees, when standing committee on cyber security is made, it is ensured that the people having from that background is only included in those kind of standing committee. So that is again that government by amateurs is again a part of demerit of parliamentary system, right? Thereafter move to the next slide, and here on this slide we have compared the parliamentary system of Britain and India. Why this is necessary? Because parliamentary system that we do have adopted many features of Britain itself. Rather, Britain was the reason, or Britain was inspiration, because they were ultimately following this parliamentary system in India in various elections that we had in provinces or central level. So if you see, the first difference we already have discussed, right, that we are republic, but what they do have is constitutional monarchy. Their head of state is unelected, that is hereditary. Right now the queen is the head of state, while in our case we are republic. Our head of state, that is President Ramnath Kovind ji, is elected. Then PM necessarily needs to be from lower house, that is from British, but our PM can belong to any of the house. So the previous prime minister, that is Manmohan Singh, for both the terms he belonged to Rajya Sabha. Then there is a system that speaker, and that is a custom, right? So speaker, as soon MP is elected as a speaker, right, he has to resign from his party. Although there is a security, the security is that for around 25 years his constituency is fixed, right? But that is not the case in our case, right? It entirely depends on that speaker's will, whether he wants to belong from primary membership of the party he belongs to or not. The last time Somnath Chatterjee was the only, not only, but recent case of Somnath Chatterjee during the second phase or first phase of UPA, he was the one who had resigned from his party, right? And it was only after he came back from the speaker's post, right, that he joined the political party. Then legal responsibility of ministers. So whatever acts are signed by queen or king, that is head of state, right, in British system, it has to be countered signed by ministers as well, right? And that's why there is a legal responsibility for every act that is enacted in Britain. That is not the case in our parliamentary system, right? Because the act that is signed by president, right, that needs not to be countersigned by council of minister. Thereafter they do have a shadow cabinet. What is this shadow cabinet? Means opposition party has a similar form of cabinet that the government has, right? So that they do compete with each other. That is no such case in our parliamentary system. Then in British parliamentary system, what they do have is parliamentary sovereignty. Their judiciary is very weak as vis-a-vis legislature, right? So they do have complete parliamentary control, but that is not the case. In our case, there is balance between judicial and parliamentary powers, right? So I hope you do have clarity on this comparison, and this was the last vertical, right? As far as the comparison between presidential system and parliamentary system that Laxmikant has done, we have not done that separately, because when we were discussing the merits and demerits of parliamentary system, along with that we were having discussion on this comparison as well. That's why I have not made a separate slide on comparison between presidential and parliamentary system, because along with the discussion we had discussed that comparison as well. That's why separate slide I did not feel necessary. Now let us move to the next vertical and the last vertical, that is MCQs. So these MCQs I am not going to discuss. I will expect that you would have developed understanding on this parliamentary system, presidential system, and on the basis of this lecture only these MCQs has been put up, right? So you can, okay, so the last vertical, sorry, second last vertical is pending. So why founders decided to go with parliamentary system? So the first reason is the familiarity with the system. So already we discussed that during the provincial election or election at central level, right, what we were following pre-independence was parliamentary system. So there is always a say that a known devil is better than an unknown angel. So presidential system was an unknown angel, right, while the known devil was parliamentary system, right? So that's why we decided to go with what you call parliamentary system. Then preference to more responsibility. So if you remember, right, there was a debate between responsibility or stability, right? So presidential system was offering stability, but because of separation of power, they did not have the responsibility component, and in the chaotic situation we got the independence, right? And also we did not wanted to promote dictatorial tendencies, right? And that's why we gave more importance to the responsibility component from the debate of responsibility and stability, and that's why we decided to go with parliamentary system, because parliamentary system has more amount of responsibility vis-a-vis presidential system. Then need to avoid that legislative executive conflict that presidential system has. You would have seen the cases of Trump often conflicting with the decisions or the policies that Congress designs, and that's why we did not wanted to have that, right? And that's why we decided to go with this parliamentary system. So I hope you would have clarity on that, why we decided to, or why our constitutional fathers decided to go with this parliamentary system. Now this last vertical, and that is the MCQs, right? So just pause this video, right? See, read this and reply to us in comment section. So this was the first question. Second question, is this visible? Let me get off the screen. second, thereafter third, fourth and fifth, right? So with this we are getting over what you call, oh, this is the next slide. So with this we are wrapping up this lecture, right? The next lecture would be on federal system. So wait till then. Till then, bye bye. Thank you.